Welcome to the KIMIYA Healing Podcast. This episode is about people pleasing and what happens when you find yourself in a long-term dynamic whereby you are essentially putting other people and their needs before yours, or whereby you have placed other people's happiness and safety and peace of mind before your own. People-pleasing behavior can take many different forms, and what's really interesting is the experience of the people pleaser is that they are doing something really noble and doing something that is virtuous. And after all, we're told to treat others as we would ourselves, and we're told to take care of other people and put them first, and especially when that's people we love. But what happens when that becomes a people pleasing and a sustained dynamic that leads to self-betrayal, and that leads to loss of self, or that leads to sacrificing of one's own values? What happens then? So this podcast is really about how to overcome that dynamic if that's what you're finding yourself in. So let's start at the beginning. People-pleasing behavior. How do you identify if you have fallen into a dynamic within your relationships, within your world, or just even as a character trait where your inherent inclination, your reflex is to try to please the people around you, or the person you're speaking to, or the person that you're in love with, or your children, your boss, whoever it is? What happens when you're inherently wired, your body is wired, nervous system's wired towards putting them first at the expense, and this is what's really key when it comes to the difference between being in service and loving the other versus being a people pleaser, is the degree of self-sacrifice that's involved. Now, often people who have been in dynamics where they are overreaching and finding themselves stretched very thin to please other people at the expense of their own truth and their own center, their own sense of self, as I said, will not recognize this very easily until it comes to the point where you start to feel like you're not getting reciprocation, or like you're not being perhaps seen or supported the way that you see and support the other person. Perhaps it's that you feel like you're giving so much and you're getting back maybe breadcrumbs, or you feel like you give a lot of the benefit of the doubt, but when it comes to you actually feel maybe judged or sidelined or unsupported. Whatever it is, if this is sustained over long periods of time, you can end up developing this people-pleasing character. And what tends to happen when you find yourself in that experience within is that you attract people who gravitate towards that and don't really have an intention to support and serve you, but have a need to take and to receive whatever it is that you're giving them, because there's a deep imbalance there. So it's not a fair exchange. It's not a fair. It's not really a fair trade. So over the long term, this can create a lot of resentment, and the resentment is often felt and projected externally, and is felt as anger, or is felt as abandonment, frustration, etc. because it's very difficult to look within and find the people-pleasing dynamic within us. It's much easier to be frustrated and angry or sad, or to feel abandoned or betrayed by someone else. And the point of this podcast is really to invite you to look within yourself at the experiences that have created this tendency for you to leave your center to serve others, for you to continuously and consistently abandon yourself in order to make sure that other people are taken care of. Now, this is something that perhaps will happen at various points in your life. Particularly inflection points like motherhood or new partnerships, or maybe you're caring for your elderly parents, or you're finding yourself in a very challenging career that's demanding a lot of you, and you're really having to leave your center to make sure that everyone else and everything else is taken care of and everyone is pleased with you. And as long as they're pleased with you, you're safe. As long as they're pleased with you, you're worthy, you're okay, you're acceptable. And so what happens when you eventually stop pleasing and stop being so accommodating and stop reaching out of your center? And what happens when you come back to yourself? Well, if this is all you've really known, if this is the foundation of your identity and your dynamics, your relationships, then it can feel very difficult to come back to your center, because it's very threatening to your identity. And you may end up with thoughts and feelings like, well, if I come back to serve me, first of all, I don't even really know what that means. I don't even really know what that feels like. I don't know how I would do that without everything else falling apart, or without me being rejected, or without me being abandoned, right? And if you're holding together, big structures like a family, or like a career, a business, a community, whatever it is that you're holding, that you feel you're really stretching yourself very thin and constantly trying to please other people over yourself, over time, it can feel like that whole system is at risk of falling apart, because you take your center back, you put yourself in the focus. And that in itself is very threatening, because when the systems around us fall apart, the structures around us start to move. They never really fall apart, but when they start to move and shift, it leads to all sorts of feelings and emotions coming up to the surface. So if you're listening to this right now, and reflecting on maybe dynamics in your life where there's the people-pleasing part of you is really strong and really prevalent, and is actually so strong that it's overriding your own intuitive sense of who you are and what you want, and it's this external worth, external sense of validation that's generating your self-worth, because as long as you keep feeding and pleasing others, you become worthy. It creates a very exhausting cycle, because you can never really feed or please anyone if you're not really feeding and pleasing yourself. Ultimately, you will end up surrounded by hungry ghosts or hungry vampires. You will end up being surrounded by people who are so used to you being in your almost subservient position. And bear in mind, this is all very unconscious. This is not something that we necessarily become aware of until pain points arrive. We start to feel the pain of it. And being in that environment, having those dynamics and trying to sustain them over the long term is very painful, can lead to a lot of distorted belief systems that you hold about yourself. And it can lead to this sense of, I don't really know how to fuel myself. I don't really know how to nourish my own soul. I don't know how to support my own growth. I don't know how I get to feel free and how I get to shine and how I get to feel served and in balance with people around me. Now, the first way that you can start to explore this is to, I know it might sound quite cliche because we're always going back to childhood, aren't we? But it's really the most obvious place to start. And I always like to start with the most obvious places. And when we've exhausted that, we'll move to the more esoteric. But let's start with childhood. Let's start with what it was like for you as a child growing up. Did you find yourself having to perhaps please and be very highly aware of other people's emotional states, like your parents, your siblings, your teachers? Did you have to become very highly aware of their emotional state to the point where your emotional state almost became secondary or became intertwined with how they were feeling? This is very common, because when you find yourself like in that system as a child, whereby other people around you, their feelings matter more, that's what it comes down to. And internalizing the feeling that other people are more valuable than you are. Other people are more important. Their safety, their peace, their well-being comes before you. There's something within that you can explore to really identify who made you feel like that for the first time. Who do you remember being around you that made you feel like it was so important that they were okay, even if you were not okay? And so pleasing them would make it okay for you. And this relates to safety in childhood. This relates to emotional safety in childhood, and the sense that a young child can feel very easily how a parent is responding to them and how the house feels when they act in a certain way, how the household feels when they act in a certain way as a child. And I've had clients come to see me who have been placed in roles where they were actively the buffer in the household, the buffer of conflict or the buffer of emotion, or they were put in positions where their self-worth and being a good girl or a good boy was tied to their ability to make their parents happy or please their parents or ease the emotional state of their parent. And the clients who come to see me who've experienced this in quite extreme forms often had parents who were, I don't love labels, but on the narcissistic spectrum, or who had quite severe mental health challenges that led to them as adults being unable to regulate their emotions. So the child, essentially, they as a child would be responsible, and they knew from a very early age that they were responsible for co-regulating with their parents or parent. And co-regulation can be a really beautiful thing, but when a young child or a baby is set up in that dynamic whereby it's having to co-regulate with a parent who is very mentally challenged or very emotionally disturbed or is really on the borderline between functioning and dysfunctioning, you can already empathize and feel how deeply ingrained in that child's system this pattern of behavior is, because it's looking at every facial expression, it's looking at every emotion, it's looking for every way it can to perceive the state of the adult. And if that adult is calm, then the child is safe. If that adult is happy, then the child can be happy. If that adult is not happy, there's no way that child can be happy, right? As a young child, these are the internalized processes that happen. And these structures that exist in family units are not created consciously. They're not created necessarily out of malice. It's either cultural or it's just trauma that's been passed down and it's never been resolved, and nobody's really talking about anything in the household, or there's a lot of stress in the house, and these dynamics are being set up. It can also happen when there's trauma that's happening, emotional or sexual trauma, physical trauma that's happening actively in the household, and that can be between the parents, or it can be parents and children, etc. So this feeling of having to keep other people safe, keep other people happy, keep the peace in order to be peaceful and happy and safe, inherently leads to this exhaustion and almost like this draining feeling, like of being perpetually drained and not knowing how to overcome this, not knowing how to resource yourself, because this is the constant in your life and in your relationships. So first step is identifying, was this happening for you as a young child, and therefore did your nervous system start to learn this pattern? Did your brain start to develop this kind of perception and link your inherent self-worth with the emotional states and the mental states and the behaviors of the people around you? And when you reflect on it in that way, you can see how it would be very easy to become an adult with people-pleasing tendencies. Now, when you've reflected on your childhood and maybe you've made some notes about really what was going on for you, and perhaps you've identified in your adult relationships how the people pleaser comes out, then you want to start to understand, what's this doing to you in your current, what's this giving you, and what's this preventing you from getting, preventing you from feeling. And when you start to explore this, it will be quite a radical level of self-honesty you're going into. And this is important. You need to understand that if you're holding this pattern or this part of your identity is to be a people pleaser, you're getting something from this. And you'll only be getting your lower level needs met through this dynamic. But those lower level needs, like security, safety, they are very primal. So they're very strong, and they're very powerful, and they're very dominant until you overcome them, until you establish all those qualities of safety and security, freedom, of feeling acceptable. If you establish that within yourself, that's when they start to loosen within you. You start to loosen your grip a little bit from that. When you're holding that, and it's a survival mechanism, it's very difficult to suddenly change. So make a list of, what does it give you to be a people pleaser? and be really honest with yourself. Maybe being a people pleaser, maybe always being the one that rolls over in your relationship and just puts everyone and everything before you, and they must be right and you must be wrong type thinking. Maybe that comes from your need for financial security. Maybe you're worried that if you were to put yourself front and center and you were to focus on yourself a bit more, that you might be rejected, you might be abandoned, you might lose your partner, you might therefore lose your financial stability. Like sometimes it's wired that deep. So you want to really think about, what is it giving you to be a people pleaser? Maybe it's even giving you your entire identity. Maybe your entire identity is based on pleasing other people and being seen in their eyes as a good person, and therefore to maintain this feeling of I'm a good person, I must continue to do what I do. I must continue to please and put other people's needs way above my own. Now, you can also look at, what is it taking away from me? When you ask yourself that question, making a list again, what's it taking away from you to continue in that behavior, to continue with that mindset unconsciously? What does it prevent you from being able to experience, from being able to feel? What does it prevent you from realizing about yourself? I often perceive the people-pleasing dynamic it's a real comfort zone for a lot of people. It's a comfort zone because it's so tied in with the identity that it doesn't get painful until it gets really painful. So for all that time, it's just a blind comfort zone. You don't really realize that that's what you're doing. And when you start to reflect on what this is giving you and what this is taking away from you, you're going to start to be able to observe yourself with some degree of objectivity. And you're going to say, well, if this was another human being, would this be a fair trade for them? Would this setup be fair on them? Chances are you're going to come to the conclusion that it's not fair. And, that feeling of, actually, this is not fair for someone else. Well, then, is it fair for you? Is this fair for you to keep living this experience? And if you've decided that it is, that this is fair for you, that this is what you deserve and this is what you want to experience, then great. And if you've decided that it doesn't feel fair, it doesn't feel balanced, that you can make changes, then great. But ultimately, the point of doing that practice is that you're able to make your own choice. Because nobody's here to tell you who you should be and who you shouldn't be and how you should interact in your relationships and how you shouldn't. But the point is that you can choose. But you can only choose when you're free to observe. So become free to observe. And if you decide, actually, I want to introduce more balance into my dynamics, I want to feel like things are more fair, I don't see why I should have to keep constantly pleasing and putting other people's needs ahead and above my own when I'm increasingly feeling perhaps drained or exhausted or unsupported, etc., and all those feelings, and maybe resentful as well. Then you want to start saying, okay, how can you change the way that you show up within your own self, but also within your connections? Like, how do you alter the very instinctual response within you and within your body, which is to assume that somebody else's value and worth and opinion and view holds more weight and importance and is more of a priority than yours, when your body is telling you that it is, right? And this is where the key is. And the key is to recognize in that moment when you're faced with a conversation or a decision or anything really, in that moment, what's your body telling you? What is your actual body trying to communicate to you about whether this is fair for you? If you can find a way, and this is a practice, this is not going to immediately happen, this is going to happen through repetition. If you can find a way to drop into your body and listen and go, okay, this is my body right now, does not feel comfortable, but I know the words that are going to come out of my mouth are going to contradict my body, right? What I mean by that is, imagine you're having a conversation and you're so used to, maybe it's with your kids, for example, and you're so used to letting them have their way or saying yes when actually you mean no, because you don't want them to get upset, and you are putting their needs far, far above your needs or your needs as a family, right? You're going to have a tendency to do that until you drop into your body and you go, okay, what's my body saying? Well, my body is saying I'm uncomfortable with this. Now, that's your time, that's your moment to just make a no, because that's all you're going to be able to do in that reflex response. All you're going to be able to do is notice, right? But all it takes is for you to notice. You don't have to immediately make a huge change. It's not going to be easy to suddenly come out with a completely different way of being, right? The first thing is notice. Notice what your body is saying about how it's feeling. When you start to notice the degree of information that your body's holding and perhaps a degree of discomfort that you feel, and then you notice what you're saying, which is not corresponding to what your body's saying. So you're saying something, but you don't really back it with your body, right? So there's a disconnection there. The more you notice that happening, the more you're going to become aware. Because your body and your heart will never want you to self-sacrifice to the point of resentment in order to please anybody else. That's not what you're here to do. That's not what your human experience is about. That's not what your spiritual experience is about. And it doesn't lead to more love by doing that. But you're only going to realize that when you take that moment to observe and you notice the disconnection between body and what you say, body and maybe what you do. Gradually, you're going to notice that more and more, and you're going to become aware. So when you become aware, it's usually quite uncomfortable, right? And when you become uncomfortable, because you're aware of something, it's such a powerful experience, because then you have a chance to do things differently. If you were always in that comfort zone of disconnection from your truth, you'll stay there because it's comfortable, because you're not aware and it's not painful enough for you to become aware. Now you become aware, you're noticing, and it's becoming uncomfortable. It's going to become quite painful for you to continue to override your inherent knowing and truth in order to keep other people happy. And when you get to that point where it becomes too uncomfortable for you to do that, that's when you're going to start doing things differently. That's usually the point when people blow up or have a meltdown or conflict arises or they have a confrontation, etc. Now, the point is, And that's usually the point where people start projecting their own inner discomfort on the other person. Things like, oh, but you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, I do so much for you, and what do you do for me? Or look at everything I've done for you all this time, and I don't get anything back from you, blah, 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 right? That's usually because their inner discomfort is now being projected outwards and is starting to speak. But you're not here to speak from that voice, right? Because that experience, that constant disconnection within you that has created that discomfort, that's not to do with the other person. They've just been part of it because you've enabled it and you've allowed it within yourself. So instead of making it about them, make it about you. How do you do that? You're noticing the discomfort. You're aware of it. Okay. Now you have a chance to use a different way of communicating. So you can actually start communicating in a way that's more authentic. And it might not be easy at first. For example, it's very difficult for some people to be clear with their boundaries or clear with their needs, especially emotional needs. Like, I often have to teach my clients how to communicate their emotional needs to their partners because they're so used to communicating in distorted ways or through distorted behaviors. And by distorted, I mean it's not really what they're truly feeling, but they're trying to get there, what they're truly feeling. They're trying to get met there, but they don't know how to communicate it. So they communicate something slightly different and get a response back, which never really lands. So the whole point of this is to choose a way to communicate that allows you to drop into a deeper level of authenticity and allows you to actually be real with yourself and with the other person. And it might not be that you can completely turn the tables around and reclaim your power and your center and establish immediate fairness and balance and everything is hunky-dory. It may not go like that. You may just start by voicing the fact that you're not sure if you're fully comfortable with something. That in itself is more real and more authentic than trying to please at the expense of yourself, right? And learning how to say things like that, learning how to voice when you're in that kind of in-between place where you don't really know how to say what you want, or how to say what you think, but you know that your body feels a certain way. Sometimes just, you're reflecting back what your body's feeling. Like, I'm feeling a little bit tense about this right now in my body, and I need some time to reflect on what that tension is. That can be met more compassionately by somebody else rather than a people-pleasing yes or flat out no, right? So the point is, slow everything down, take time to notice and observe. When you have noticed and observed, go back to your body and try to speak from the authenticity of your body. And don't worry too much about the response. Somebody that's got very used to being served and catered to by you at the expense of yourself may find it quite difficult to not get an immediate yes or an immediate pacification or immediate support or immediate validation. They may find it difficult when you take a moment and actually don't feed the dynamic, but instead stay in your experience. But that's not really your problem, right? Obviously, when people have been gone through a lot of trauma, raised in a lot of trauma, is this kind of hypersensitivity that develops where you kind of know exactly what's going to happen and what people are about to say just by a slight facial reaction or just by a slight intonation in the voice, because you're very hypersensitive. So you might be reading into that and thinking, oh, okay, well, my nervous system's already responding to that, so I now better start people pleasing again, because I can sense already that we're in an area of discomfort. And so your reflex is going to be to try to pacify and try to soothe your discomfort, your inner discomfort and unease, by going back to the old behavior. And again, it's important to just accept that is probably going to happen a few times before you start to develop and cultivate a more authentic way of communicating your truth, and not worrying about how the other person is going to respond, right? Taking ownership first and foremost of your integrity and your speech, your communication, your expression, before you take ownership of their response. It's up to them to take ownership of their response, right? You can consider that. You can be considerate and consider them. But remember, considering others at the expense of you being who you are leads to people-pleasing behavior. So you don't want to over-consider. You don't want to have to mother their emotional reaction before you have mothered your own. Yeah? Once you've gone through that process and you've started to slowly calibrate to a new way of communicating, the next thing to do is notice, does it change? Does it change things? How do you feel when you, I dare to say, stand up for yourself? How do you feel? How do you feel when you operate from a place of truth within you? Your truth. How does it feel for you? Do you feel, and at the beginning you might feel a bit shaky, you might feel a bit uncertain, you might feel a bit worried about what's going to happen, but gradually you're going to start to feel more comfortable. Just take note of how you do feel. When you take note of how you feel, speaking from your authentic heart, speaking from a place where you value your own expression, you value your own experience equally to the other person's, you raise your own sense of self-worth just by doing that. So think about that and reflect on that. You raise your own inner sense of self-worth. You start to it starts to build and heighten within you. You start to develop conviction, inner conviction. When you start to do that, and you practice that in real life repeatedly, you will start to feel within yourself like a renewed strength, and the safety that you are seeking from external factors and people and their responses, you're going to start to build that safety within you. And this is really part of what it means to feel safe within yourself. And we often hear like, oh, we often talk as therapists about safety, and we talk about it with our clients, and our clients start to pick up the language, and I'm just here breaking it down, that, and really trying to explain what safety can feel like and what safety can mean, and how we can cultivate ever deeper levels of safety within us, right? When you start to do this, you start to feel safe within yourself, it becomes really hard to enact self-pleasing behaviors. Sorry, not self-pleasing behaviors. People-pleasing behaviors. It becomes really hard to enact it, because the things that the things that you were getting by feeding this dynamic, the things, as I mentioned, like the really lower level needs, like security and safety, you already feel that now within yourself. So you no longer have to enact people-pleasing behaviors to feel safe, right? You no longer have to enact people-pleasing tendencies of yours to feel secure or to feel a sense of self-worth, because you already have it within you. You already feel it. And when you start to go into this place, that's when you start to be able to speak your truth. You start to be able to take some risks. You start to be able to give yourself the benefit of the doubt when you're taking risks, right? You start to be able to be to really express yourself in a way that the importance is on you expressing your truth rather than it needing to be wrong or right, or it needing to benefit other people or not. It's just about you expressing your truth. That's all. And when you start to get to that point, you're tuning in now to that freedom within you. And that's really what I'm getting at here, is really the throat chakra, the heart chakra, womb chakra, yeah? It's really all about womb, heart, throat, being in alignment with that and embodying that. This is a practice for that. So it allows you to be more real, and to be real in a way that feels good to you and it feels right to you, and it's more than safety and it's more than security now it's about expression, and it's a higher level, right? It's about creativity, it's about expression, it's about freedom, it's about joy, it's about connection. These are higher level needs. And so by going through this process, you're going from the base level needs, which you got met through people-pleasing behavior, meeting them within yourself, cultivating those base level needs within yourself. When you have that foundation, then starting to rise up within your own body, starting to rise up into the heart and into the throat, starting to really just dance with your own expression and start to feel how you truly want to feel, which is all these things I've just mentioned. Now, doing this in conjunction with womb work and trauma healing work and working on your sense of self-expression as part of your trauma healing journey is a really powerful way to do it, because not only will you be able to do it faster, and you'll actually be able to go much deeper than if you're just to work with this concept. If you were to work with something conceptually, self-expression conceptually, authenticity conceptually, like, yeah, it's great, but when you embody it and when you really connect your own story and stories and identity, and you go deeper and you make it really personal to you, that's when you start to get the real big shifts within you and shifts externally to you. So you will eventually, if not very rapidly, get to the point where you just really have no desire to people please, or when you do, you're quite aware of it and you know why you're doing it, in which case you can reflect and it's not so consuming, and it's never at the detriment of your own well-being or your own truth, right? It's lovely to want to please other people. It's lovely to want to make someone else smile. I'm not saying don't do those things. Of course, take joy in that and experience the joy of that. But the joy of that is experienced when you feel the joy yourself inside. When you're feeling drained, unsupported, resentful, sidelined, overlooked, unseen, lost, all these things that can happen after, so many years of people-pleasing behavior. When you're feeling all those things, it's difficult to feel what you're truly capable of, which is the joy and the freedom and the expression and the inner sense of self-worth and security. So my advice is to test. I always say this to my students and my clients: test things out, experiment. You are the experiment. You are the crazy scientist. You are the lab. You are everything. Within you is an alchemical lab. Your whole life is an experiment. Let yourself test this out. Put it into practice. Next time you go to see your friends, and you feeling like you really want to lean in and people please everyone, and you know it's going to just lead to perhaps everyone dumping their problems on you, or you know, maybe you just don't get heard in the conversation at all, and everyone's talking over you, and then you just kind of end up slipping into this people pleasing behavior where it's all about making other people comfortable when you're not comfortable. Test things out by in safe environments, by trying something different, and going through this process of, as I say, recognizing how your body feels, taking time, letting yourself speak from your body, letting yourself respond from a place of authenticity, not worrying too much about what the other person is going to react to or what the other person's going to think of you. Just focusing on, does this feel right for you to say it? Does this feel right for you to do? And over time, you're going to build this memory. This is like it's like a muscle. You have to use and work with it in order to really feel its full potential, its full range. And you want to be able to keep practicing in your daily life. This is how you get to a point of freedom where you know and you just feel whatever comes out, whatever you need to say, whatever you need to do is just, it's going to please you and it's going to please other people, and it's just the balance, it's just fair. Now, not only will this help you to heal relationships where you've become resentful because of this dynamic, or where you feel unseen, but it's going to take you into your next level of evolution, because then the next level of evolution is always into the higher levels of our higher needs, such as freedom, creativity, connection, inspiration, and awe and wonder. And when it takes you into higher levels of human experience, you start to experience life differently. People respond to you differently, and you don't attract people who you need to enact people-pleasing behavior with. You attract people who are in a completely different state of consciousness. They will not expect that from you, and they may even point it out to you if that's what you're doing, right? Because they're of that level of awareness, they will never want you to compromise and sacrifice your values and your truth to make them comfortable or to make them feel at ease. And that is when you know you're really meeting your soul tribe, and you're really going to start to feel a different level of connection when you're in that place. And there's no better place to start than with your own family, your own friendships, your own partnerships, to do this and experiment with this. And if you do, and you decide that you're going to take this on as a challenge, then let me know how it goes. And I'm really interested in what your process is like, and if you're finding that this is helping and changing your how you show up for yourself and the kind of relationships that you develop as a result of that. So yeah, get in touch with me and let me know. I'd be really, really interested to hear how you go. I would say if you do this practice, this is quite a deep one. If you do this practice in this order, it's probably about, I would say, if you do it intensively, about 4 weeks. That's what's coming through. About 4 weeks of, if you do this daily, you really focus on making this your priority. You could do this for about 4 weeks and you'll start to see. I don't like to use the term light at the end of the tunnel, because I think that light is everywhere and ever present. But you will start to feel a shift within you. And there's no better feeling than that. So I hope this podcast has helped you out. Please don't forget to follow and subscribe to this podcast and to share it with people that you like and love. And if you feel like you want to go deeper in your healing journey, then just reach out to me on my website, KIMIYAhealing.com, and it'll be great to speak to you. All right, I will see you on the next one.